When we talk about a relationship resume, the first thing I want you to understand is that this is not a dating profile. It's not a list of ex-partners or romantic conquests, nor is it a measure of success or failure. A relationship resume is something far more subtle, far more profound. It is, in essence, a mirror, a structured reflection of your emotional history, your patterns of connection, and the ways in which you have learned, or failed to learn, about intimacy. It's an inventory of your relational self, not your social persona. Think of it as a personal report card for the ways you love, communicate, and navigate human bonds. At first glance, this may feel uncomfortable. We are rarely encouraged to dissect our relationships with such rigor. Society often tells us to move on, to forget the past, or to just enjoy the moment. But when we ignore the past, we also ignore its lessons. A relationship resume is a tool for clarity. It allows us to see not just the chronology of our experiences, but the emotional logic behind them. Why did you react the way you did when a partner withdrew? What patterns emerge in the ways you attach, or perhaps in the ways you avoid attachment altogether? These are not questions of judgment. They are questions of self-understanding, and that understanding is the foundation for growth. It's also important to emphasize that a relationship resume is not static. It evolves with you. Just as a professional resume might be updated as you gain new skills, insights, and accomplishments, your relational resume changes as you gain emotional wisdom. Each relationship, whether fleeting or long-term, contributes to this evolving document. Each heartbreak, each moment of joy, each instance of miscommunication or betrayal leaves an imprint. And when we take the time to examine these imprints, patterns begin to emerge, patterns that often repeat until we consciously intervene. Consider for a moment the psychology behind this. Human beings are creatures of habit. We form attachment patterns early in life, influenced by family dynamics, cultural expectations, and personal temperament. These patterns, while invisible in daily life, govern much of how we behave in intimate connections. Some of us seek constant reassurance, others fear vulnerability. Some of us are drawn to partners who challenge us, others gravitate toward those who mirror familiar dynamics from childhood. The relationship resume becomes a tool to illuminate these subconscious tendencies. It turns invisible forces into visible structures we can study, understand, and if necessary, transform. Philosophically, the idea of a relationship resume also challenges a deeper, often unexamined notion that love is something that simply happens to us. Most people approach relationships with the implicit belief that attraction and desire are random, that chemistry is fate. But in truth, while chemistry may ignite, the patterns of connection we bring to relationships are learned, and they can be unlearned. A relationship resume is, therefore, an exercise in agency. It is the assertion that we are not merely passive recipients of love, but active participants who can, with insight and intention, shape the quality of our bonds. Creating a relationship resume also demands courage because it requires honesty. Honesty not just with partners or with society, but with yourself. It asks us to acknowledge mistakes, to confront uncomfortable truths, and to recognize where we may have hurt others or ourselves. But here is the paradox. The very act of confronting these truths frees us. By documenting our relational history, we externalize it. We objectify it in a way that allows reflection rather than rumination. Patterns that once felt like inevitable repetitions now appear as choices. Habits that once seemed fixed now become teachable moments. In practical terms, a relationship resume is surprisingly simple. It might include reflections on communication styles, emotional triggers, attachment tendencies, conflict resolution strategies, and even moments of vulnerability or courage. It could note the lessons learned from both successful and unsuccessful connections. The key is to approach it not as a ledger of blame or regret, but as a map that helps you navigate future relationships with greater awareness and intentionality. Ultimately, the power of a relationship resume lies in its ability to transform your relationship with yourself. It invites a form of self-inquiry that is rigorous but compassionate. It teaches you that your relational history is not a burden to carry, but a resource to leverage. And it underscores a profound truth. The quality of the love you give and the love you receive is inseparable from the depth of understanding you cultivate about yourself. So, as you begin to consider your own relationship resume, remember this. Knowing yourself in love is not vanity. It is preparation, it is wisdom, and it is the first step toward breaking patterns that no longer serve you and toward cultivating relationships that do. Every insight you record, every pattern you recognize, brings you closer to a life where your connections are not accidental, but intentional, not reactive, but conscious. And in the end, the question is not whether you have loved, but whether you have learned. Because the art of love is, above all, the art of reflection. Once we understand what a relationship resume is, the next question naturally arises: why do we need one? Why bother documenting, reflecting, and analyzing our emotional history? The answer lies in clarity and self-reflection, two things that are astonishingly rare in human relationships. Most people enter partnerships carrying a fog of unconscious habits, unresolved emotions, and vague expectations, believing that love will somehow sort it all out. And sometimes it does. Briefly, beautifully, and then just as suddenly, it doesn't. The patterns you repeat, the mistakes you overlook, the needs you fail to articulate, they all accumulate until they create conflict, disappointment, or heartbreak. A relationship resume is a tool that brings these hidden currents into the light. At its core, the relationship resume is about understanding the why behind your behavior. Consider this. When a partner withdraws, do you panic? Do you pursue? Do you shut down? Or when conflict arises, do you escalate, compromise, or retreat? These responses are rarely random. They are echoes of your past experiences. Perhaps your early attachments taught you that love is conditional, that silence signals rejection, that vulnerability is dangerous. Perhaps you've had relationships where your generosity was exploited, or where emotional walls were met with aggression. The relationship resume is a lens through which you examine these patterns, not to blame yourself, but to illuminate them. Clarity arises when the unconscious becomes conscious. Self-reflection is not passive. It is active, deliberate, and sometimes uncomfortable. It asks us to pause, to slow down, to resist the seductive rush of passion or the easy inertia of habit. When you document your relational tendencies, you begin to see patterns that previously seemed invisible. Maybe you notice that you repeatedly fall for partners who are emotionally unavailable. Maybe you see that conflict triggers defensiveness, or that moments of intimacy provoke anxiety. These are not flaws to be shamed, but signals, data points in the ongoing experiment of your emotional life. By seeing them clearly, you gain the power to intervene, to choose differently, to behave differently. There is also a profound philosophical dimension to this practice. Most of us treat relationships as if they exist outside the realm of choice, as if attraction, desire, and compatibility are purely matters of fate. But in truth, the quality of our connections is deeply influenced by self-awareness. The more we understand our patterns, the more we understand the mechanics of our attachment, the more we understand our own emotional triggers, the more intentional we can be. A relationship resume transforms us from passive recipients of circumstance into active participants in the shaping of our relational lives. It is a declaration of agency. I will not simply drift into love. I will navigate it with awareness, responsibility, and intention. But let's be honest, this is not easy work. Many of us avoid self-reflection because it demands honesty, and honesty can hurt. We must confront our own contribution to relational struggles, acknowledge where we have acted out of fear, selfishness, or insecurity. We must examine how our choices, consciously or unconsciously, have perpetuated patterns that no longer serve us. And yet, this confrontation is liberating. It is through understanding that patterns lose their power. The very act of naming them, of seeing them clearly, weakens their hold over us. What once felt like an inevitable repetition of pain now becomes a series of opportunities for conscious choice. The practical benefits of this clarity are significant. When you know yourself, you can communicate yourself more effectively. You can articulate your needs, boundaries, and expectations with precision. You can enter a new relationship not with vague hope, but with insight. Instead of projecting old fears onto a new partner, you can recognize triggers as your own and respond with awareness rather than reactivity. You can identify compatibility or incompatibility early, reducing unnecessary conflict. In short, you gain relational literacy, the ability to read, understand, and respond to the dynamics of connection with intelligence and empathy. Perhaps most importantly, a relationship resume nurtures emotional safety. When you understand your own patterns and needs, you are less likely to feel blindsided by conflict, abandonment, or miscommunication. Emotional safety is not granted by others, it is cultivated within yourself. By reflecting on your relational history, you create a foundation of trust in your own capacity to navigate love with awareness, resilience, and grace. So, when you ask yourself why you need a relationship resume, the answer is simple. Because love without reflection is blind, and connection without clarity is fragile. Your experiences, joyful and painful alike, are not obstacles to avoid. They are guides, teaching you where you are free, where you are bound, and where you have the power to change. The act of reflecting, documenting, and understanding your relational patterns is not indulgence, it is preparation. It is not dwelling on the past, it is learning from it. And here is the closing thought I want you to carry with you. Every relationship you have ever had, every emotional triumph, and every heartbreak is a teacher. But the lesson remains incomplete until you acknowledge it, analyze it, and integrate it. A relationship resume is your way of taking responsibility for your own love story, of transforming passive experience into conscious mastery. If you do this work, you will not only see yourself more clearly, you will see your potential for connection more clearly, and in that clarity lies the power to love more wisely, more deeply, and more fully than you ever have before. Once we have reflected on our past relationships and gained clarity through a relationship resume, the question naturally turns to the future. How does this awareness actually change the way we relate? Understanding yourself is not an end in itself, it is a doorway. A relationship resume becomes a tool for transformation, not just introspection. It is one thing to know your patterns, your triggers, your habits of attachment. It is another, far more powerful thing to use that knowledge to create healthier, more fulfilling relationships. Because here's the truth: most of the relational suffering we experience is not caused by our partners, but by the unconscious repetition of our own patterns. Once these patterns are illuminated, we can begin to rewrite them. Think about this for a moment. How often do we enter new relationships carrying unresolved fears from old ones? A partner's delayed text can trigger anxiety that belongs not to them, but to a previous betrayal. A disagreement over household responsibilities may feel like a reflection of inadequacy, echoing childhood lessons. We respond not to the present moment, but to layers of accumulated experiences, some of which have nothing to do with who is in front of us. A relationship resume acts like a map in this territory. It allows us to identify the emotional landmarks we carry, the triggers, the insecurities, the unspoken expectations. With awareness, we can navigate these moments with intention rather than being swept along by unconscious habit. This clarity transforms the way we communicate. When you understand your own emotional architecture, you can express yourself with nuance and precision. Instead of reacting defensively or withdrawing in fear, you can articulate what you need, what you feel, and what you fear. Your partner, in turn, can respond to the person in front of them rather than the unresolved shadows of your past. Conflict, which so often becomes a battleground of blame, becomes instead an opportunity for mutual understanding. This is not theoretical, it is psychological. Studies in attachment theory, in emotional intelligence, show that self-awareness directly improves relational satisfaction. Knowing your own patterns reduces projection, increases empathy, and cultivates responsiveness instead of reactivity. But the impact goes beyond communication. A relationship resume also deepens intimacy. Consider intimacy not just as physical closeness, but as the courage to be seen fully. Your desires, your vulnerabilities, your fears. When you understand yourself, you can be present in ways that are authentic and unguarded. You can recognize when your own walls are rising and choose to lower them intentionally. You can recognize when your partner's walls are rising and meet them with curiosity rather than judgment. In this way, emotional insight becomes a relational skill. Awareness of your history is not a distraction from the present, it is an enrichment of it. Furthermore, this process allows us to make better choices about compatibility. Most people focus on superficial markers, shared hobbies, physical attraction, or convenient schedules. But a relationship resume encourages us to look deeper. It asks questions like, do our communication styles align? Do our emotional needs complement each other? Are our conflict patterns compatible, or will they amplify each other? By examining our relational patterns, we gain the ability to evaluate potential partners with discernment, not just desire. This doesn't eliminate risk and it doesn't guarantee permanence, but it dramatically increases the likelihood of creating relationships that are both emotionally satisfying and sustainable. The philosophical depth of this practice is profound. To use a relationship resume is to embrace responsibility, not moral guilt, but conscious authorship of your relational life. It is a recognition that while we cannot control the actions of others, we can control how we engage, how we respond, how we grow. The power of this responsibility is enormous. Relationships that once felt like battlegrounds can become laboratories for learning. Tension that once provoked despair can become a catalyst for empathy. Desire that once floundered can be guided by insight rather than repetition. And here is the most subtle yet powerful effect. A relationship resume nurtures resilience. Life will always bring misunderstandings, heartbreaks, and disappointments. Partners will falter, circumstances will challenge connection. But when you understand your own patterns, you can recover more gracefully. You recognize what is yours to take responsibility for and what is beyond your control. You can approach each challenge with curiosity rather than fear, with choice rather than reaction. Emotional resilience is not merely surviving conflict. It is thriving within it, with awareness as your compass. So, as you begin to apply the lessons from your relationship resume, remember that this is not self-absorption. It is relational empowerment. The work of self-awareness translates directly into relational skill, into empathy, into courage. The patterns of the past, once illuminated, become tools rather than chains. The mistakes we have made become guides rather than burdens. And the result is not perfection, but intentionality. The ability to love with consciousness, to connect without compulsion, and to navigate intimacy with wisdom. Let me leave you with this. The relationships we build tomorrow are shaped not only by desire, but by understanding. Knowledge of your relational history is the key that allows you to unlock not just better communication or healthier boundaries, but the capacity for love that is intentional, resilient, and fully alive. The power to transform your connections is in your hands, because insight, once gained, becomes action, and every choice made with awareness is a step toward relationships that are not accidental, but deliberate, and ultimately, profoundly fulfilling. By now, we have explored what a relationship resume is, why it matters, and how it can transform the way we connect with others. The final and perhaps most practical step is understanding how to create one. How to translate reflection into action. Because knowledge alone is insufficient, insight must be applied. A relationship resume is not a static document. It is a living, evolving guide to your relational self. And the process of building it is, in itself, transformative, because it forces us to confront, organize, and ultimately integrate the lessons of our emotional history. Creating your own relationship resume begins with reflection. You must be willing to look back at the relationships you've had, not just romantic, but also familial, friendships, and significant connections. Every interaction, every attachment carries information. Ask yourself, what worked, what didn't, what patterns do I notice repeating? Perhaps you are drawn to partners who challenge your independence, or maybe you repeatedly avoid conflict to preserve harmony. These observations are not about assigning blame. They are about noticing tendencies, understanding how your emotional habits were formed, and beginning to see the architecture of your relational life. Once you have observed these patterns, the next step is articulation. Writing them down is crucial. The human mind tends to recycle experiences, replaying moments without clarity or resolution. By documenting your relational experiences, you externalize them. You give them form, which allows for analysis rather than rumination. This can include reflecting on communication styles, conflict tendencies, emotional triggers, boundaries, attachment habits, and even moments of vulnerability or courage. Some people structure it chronologically, others thematically. The exact format matters less than the act of putting your insights into words. This is a process of objectifying your history, transforming ephemeral emotions into actionable knowledge. The third element is extraction of lessons. For each relationship or pattern you identify, ask, what did I learn about myself? What did I learn about intimacy, trust, or emotional risk? What did I learn about compatibility, boundaries, or my capacity to give and receive love? These lessons form the core of your relationship resume. They are the distilled wisdom of experience, and they become your guideposts. The aim is not to judge yourself for past mistakes, but to honor the learning embedded within them. Mistakes, regrets, and heartbreaks are not failures. They are data points that illuminate your path forward. Then comes the step of application. A relationship resume is not a trophy of insight to be admired. It is a tool to be used. Once you have clarity about your patterns, you can approach new relationships intentionally. You can recognize red flags without overreacting, communicate your needs with precision, and navigate emotional challenges with awareness. You can also see your partner more clearly, understanding that their patterns, just like yours, are shaped by history and habit. The relationship resume allows empathy to flourish because insight reduces projection. You respond to the reality of connection rather than the shadows of your past. There is also a philosophical dimension to this practice. Building a relationship resume is, in essence, an act of authorship. It is the acknowledgement that you are the primary architect of your relational life. While others cannot control your happiness or your fulfillment, you can control how you show up, how you respond, and how you integrate experience into wisdom. This is an empowering perspective because it transforms love from a passive experience into an active, conscious practice. You are no longer swept along by repetition. You are steering your own relational trajectory. Importantly, this work fosters resilience. Life will inevitably bring disappointment, heartbreak, or conflict. Partners will make mistakes. Circumstances will challenge intimacy. But when you know your patterns, when you understand your triggers, when you have distilled lessons from past experiences, you are equipped to respond rather than react. The relationship resume becomes a toolkit for emotional agility. You can recognize when old habits are tempting you into reactive behaviors, pause, and choose a different course. You can approach connection with curiosity rather than fear, with presence rather than projection. Finally, the relationship resume is a commitment to ongoing growth. It is not a one-time exercise, but a living document. As you navigate new relationships, gain new insights, and encounter new challenges, your resume evolves. Each new connection provides fresh data, each emotional triumph or misstep adds another layer of understanding. In this way, your relational self is never fixed. It is always in motion, always developing, always capable of deeper insight and more conscious love. So, how do you begin? Start small, but start deliberately. Reflect honestly on your past. Write down what you notice. Extract the lessons. Apply them in your interactions. Revisit and refine your insights regularly. Let this practice become a habit, a ritual of self-awareness that guides your relational life. The act of creating your relationship resume is itself a declaration that you are willing to know yourself deeply, to take responsibility for your patterns, and to love more intentionally. Let me leave you with this thought. Love is not just a feeling, it is a practice. And like any practice, it requires reflection, discipline, and courage. Your relationship resume is your blueprint for this practice, your map through the terrain of intimacy, your guide to connecting with others without losing yourself. By documenting, analyzing, and applying your lessons, you transform experience into wisdom, patterns into choice, and desire into conscious connection. The relationships you build tomorrow will be richer, more authentic, and more fulfilling, not by chance, but by design. And that ultimately is the power of knowing yourself through your relational history.